There are few issues within the study of astrobiology more controversial than the UFO UAP phenomenon. For many decades, there were the hardcore believers and the hardcore skeptics, with not much in between, and a general lack of serious scientific investigation into it. The stigma that built up around the subject essentially prevented that, but throughout, the reports continued to come in. There are many accounts of strange aerial phenomena stretching all the way back to World War II of what we could define as the modern UFO phenomenon, though people seeing strange things in the sky go back far further, indeed probably to the beginnings of humanity, and maybe before. Just look at the world's collective folklore. There are many strange stories. But as a science fiction author, I am keenly aware that any fiction I write is one step away from being folklore. Indeed, one can point to Star Wars as a kind of modern folklore, having grown past simply being soft science fiction. This dichotomy of believer and skeptic isn't new. It happens in many things. General relativity had its hard skeptics, as did the expansion of the universe and the Big Bang. There was a time not long ago that there were skeptics of the idea that people could actually go to space, and there were believers that said we could. This was a case of the believer being right, but the believers were the vast majority of scientists in that case. But even within the UFO phenomenon, it's always been this way. In the region of Lyon, France, during the Carolingian period around the year 815, a treatise was written by a bishop regarding a widespread belief in his diocese of a land called Magonia, where sky people would cause bad weather in order to come down and raid human farmers of their wheat crop. The bishop was an arch skeptic and said none of that existed, and that the adherents were ignorant idiots and it was all just storms, but then proceeded to support his argument using scriptural quotes. It was an act of God, not Magonia. Today, commercial aircraft routinely fly through Magonia without problems on their way into Lyon's international airport. But the point is, the interpretation of Magonia at the end of the Dark Ages was contextually different from our scientific viewpoint of today. There was no investigation or science there, just reports and theology. But the 20th century saw changes. Number one, we had developed science and the scientific method. But the development of radar and the proliferation of cameras allows us to actually study aerial phenomena that we deem interesting. So long as the scientists have something to measure, then they can try to figure something out. The big question was, is it worth it? What damage would it do to your career because of the stigma? And more importantly, is there even a phenomenon to study? And that's been a problem with the UFO phenomenon and science. In the past, it's largely based on word-of-mouth accounts. Granted, there is sensor data, sometimes multiple sensor data, but rarely is that data available. Governments do not like to reveal the capabilities of their classified instruments. There are things like radar returns in various encounters, but that gets into verifiability, because radar can show clutter, ghosts, and false returns. The same problem SETI has with interesting radio signals that must be discarded because they can't be verified also arises in the question of UFO radar returns, though there are cases where radar pretty reliably tracked a purported UFO, but in most cases that data was not recorded or no longer exists. That makes for one messy, incomplete data set. The good news is, when you're faced with that, then you simply need to go out and collect a good data set on the phenomenon as it currently is. Now, many would argue word-of-mouth accounts are important, and they are. After all, the world's court systems often rely on witness testimony. But they don't give you much to work with in a scientific investigation. They simply tell you that someone reported seeing something, often decades ago. That might tell you where to look with your sensors, but chances are a UFO from 1971 isn't likely to still be in the same location today. You could also look for patterns in the reports, as does Dr. Jacques Vallée, who's worked for decades to try to verify that there is a coherent phenomenon for scientists to look into. They can also hint at what to look for, but there is a wide variation in the descriptions of UFOs, ranging from glowing orbs to saucers to tic-tacs and so on. The one characteristic you have is that they are unidentified flying objects, though lately underwater moving objects have increasingly come into the debate, and the two may be linked. And this is why most scientists haven't taken the UFO phenomenon seriously in the past. There were a handful of scientists that looked into it, but comparatively few. Another problem here is that the study of UFOs isn't what astronomers really do. They are a phenomenon of the atmosphere, whereas astronomy seeks to learn about the stars, and there really is only a tangential connection. But only for those astronomers interested in alien life. Most aren't looking for that. They're studying the evolution of galaxies, the composition of stars, and so on. Add that in with no small amount of UFO sightings being misinterpretations of the mundane, and there were also many hoaxes, and there just wasn't much evidence to point out to potentially interested scientists that there may be a signal among the noise that could be looked at in a meaningful way. This has changed, and it's opened somewhat of a floodgate of scientific investigation into the UFO phenomenon. There are now many credible scientists taking a look, more than ever, both in government and in academia, and taking it seriously. And they should. There actually is a plausible way for an alien civilization to have a presence here, in the form of a von Neumann probe sitting in the solar system printing out probes and sending them into Earth's atmosphere. The only investment there would be the time required to get here at sublight speeds, but the galaxy is well old enough for that to have happened. You need not invoke unicorn technologies and faster-than-light travel to imagine an alien presence in this star system. It gets even easier with Benford probes deposited during close stellar encounters. It's entirely possible within physics for a passing star system tens of thousands of years ago that had a civilization on one of its planets to have deposited such a probe during the encounter, and what we see is they're monitoring and studying of us. This was always known in science, but because of the stigma, not really openly discussed. The watershed moment of change that opened that floodgate was the release of a congressionally mandated report compiled by the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence, linked to all material in the description below, detailing in a nutshell that yes, the U.S. Navy in particular detects and sees things that they can't readily explain. They further note that the ultimate explanations of these cases is likely to be a mixed bag. There are probably different solutions for each case. But they also were careful not to rule anything out, including an alien origin. The same echoed in a subsequent report to Congress. Again, a reiteration of that all-important word, unidentified. That was enough for potentially interested scientists to decide that there actually was a phenomenon to investigate. Most prominently through the Galileo project at Harvard, but there are many others taking a look independently. UFOs have caught the attention of science, but here comes that messy dataset. All reliable knowledge of the UFO phenomenon does not represent a scientifically actionable dataset from which to start drawing conclusions. People might ask, why aren't these scientists looking into the really interesting UFO accounts, such as the 2004 Nimitz event? The answer is simple. The instrument data isn't out there, other than one piece of FLIR footage. Anything else is classified, and it's no longer 2004. The Tic Tac likely isn't still sitting there, which is what you need if you want to collect good public data on it. So while it's an interesting case with multiple witnesses, and radar data from at least one of the ships is probably still out there but classified, so there isn't much to study other than the story itself. Though that changes if you start getting reliable sightings of the same thing, and oddly, that may have happened in 2021. A recent Freedom of Information Act release shows something interesting. While heavily redacted, as to be expected, documents from the National Reconnaissance Office describe a detection of an object from a spy satellite system of what they describe as a Tic Tac, apparently in line with the Nimitz object. Make of that what you will, but the plot has thickened. Now I have to point out yet again that I'm a skeptic of an alien origin for this phenomenon. If one goes by the accounts, all of them, the phenomenon often does things that you wouldn't expect an alien civilization to do. All too often there is an element of outright irrationality to it, sometimes to the point that whatever it was seemed to be suggesting that it wasn't an alien. Or if you want to look at alternative hypotheses, it also seemed to be saying it wasn't a humanoid from the future, or it wasn't a member of a prior technological civilization that arose on Earth in prehistory. and rather it may be due to whatever creates folklore, and so on. All I can do is throw my hands up and say that ever-important word, unidentified. I simply don't know what they are. But my mind is open, and look, it's me. It would be silly if I sat on YouTube for years pontificating about alien life without paying attention to the study of the UFO phenomenon or phenomena, just in case. That said, some serious scientists have been interested for almost 2 years now, and there is now some preliminary work to report on it. So let me tell you a tale of 3 scientific papers, 2 recent, 1 not. The first is a paper that has received some criticism, but in my view unduly so, because all it really does is set the groundwork and constraints on going about studying the UFO phenomenon in a scientific way. It does not debunk or attempt to shut anything down, as some have suggested. The first author is Harvard's Dr. Loeb, whom we're all familiar with, and the head of the Galileo project. His co-author, however, is Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the U.S. Department of Defense's probe into UFOs. The paper essentially boils down to this: any object moving through the atmosphere at very high speeds should produce signatures consistent with known physics. If you drive your car down the highway and a wind gust hits it, you feel it. The atmosphere is dynamic and has predictable properties on flying objects. If you go fast enough, your craft begins to ionize the air and generate a fireball, and as a result will start producing radio waves and other detectable effects. The paper establishes these and gives a starting point to know what to look for with instrumentation specifically intended to study UFOs. Here something has to be noted. When we talk about instrument data with UFO detections by the military, you have to bear in mind that those instruments taking the data were not designed for that. They were designed to look at aircraft from rival nation states, often based on known characteristics. A UFO may not conform to that. So you're looking at an object with a less than ideal instrument package. Not useless, but not ideal. But that you see something at all is telling in physics. If you see an object in the air, then it is obeying some laws of physics. In that photons, either from the sun lighting it up, or from the object itself if it's luminous, are being emitted and hitting your retina. That you see a UFO at all means that it is interacting with light in accordance with the laws of physics. If it weren't, it would be invisible. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a solid object either. Phenomena of light can appear to violate the laws of physics in their apparent motion. A moving beam of light, say a searchlight for example, can appear to do it. The paper also details a variant of the von Neumann 3D printer idea, but significantly different, where an interstellar object of artificial origin could plausibly pass through the solar system, depositing dandelion seeds or individual probes on its trajectory through. These probes could conceivably enter Earth's atmosphere and take a look around. If anyone sees one, then there's a UFO of alien origin. This presents a plausible way that remains entirely within the laws of physics for UFOs of alien origin that does not require faster than light travel, which so far as we know is impossible. But just do it at sublight speeds. And within that is something spooky. A candidate object for a probe of alien origin was the probable interstellar asteroid Oumuamua. This object was moving too fast to be captured by the solar system, but did exhibit some puzzling behavior, which Loeb then advanced may potentially have been of alien origin. That was met with much criticism, and my own view is that we should exhaust all natural explanations first before we get into alien territory, and the hypothesis was widely criticized for that. But I must also admit that so far, I've been wrong on this issue. And natural explanations for Oumuamua really aren't that great and involve things we've never seen before in nature. In the one we have seen, a sheet of nitrogen on Pluto, seem unlikely. In that case, surviving getting blown off its parent body as an intact sheet and then surviving millions of years of travel through the interstellar medium doesn't seem likely. And it also has to be said, we are someone else's alien civilization. And we have seen in nature that we can launch probes into space. But here's the thing. If we ever saw such an interstellar object moving far faster than Oumuamua did, then that's going to need a pretty big natural explanation. The instrument we need to detect that, the Vera Rubin Observatory, sees first light in 2024. The paper continues to lay out what you should expect from a physical object operating at high speeds in Earth's atmosphere. This is well-known territory. Human flight has been dealing with that question for longer than any of us has been alive. They are well-known principles, and if the UFO does not comply with them and exhibits the reported puzzling behavior of high speed and maneuvering against the laws of physics, the paper gives a framework of what might be wrong with the observation. Specifically distance. If you misjudge the distance to a flying object, you very well could be misjudging its actual speed. Now, many might think that was a debunk before any data has been collected by the mentioned groups looking into it, but here's why this is important. If you can establish distance data with your instrument package, it constrains down what you're looking at. But if that object is solid and the wrong distance for its apparent speed, you can ostensibly then nail it down as flaunting the laws of physics, as many UFO reports claim. And at the wrong distance for its apparent speed, you can ostensibly then nail it down as breaking the laws of physics, as many UFO reports claim. There it is, new physics exhibited by an object of unknown origin. But the options as to its origin start quickly shrinking at that point, especially if it exhibits intelligent control. There, it's either us or someone else. But physicists rightfully do not want to claim that prematurely. It would be an enormous claim that you have to prove with good data, publish it, and watch for the rebuttals of peer review until the whole thing is exhausted and a consensus forms. That's the process of science. The second paper is by Villaroel and Marcy and is in response to the Loeb paper. You'll see this often, now that the intent of the Galileo project is to publish scientific papers on UFOs in credible journals. Once you do that, scientific papers often elicit response papers authored by other scientists, expanding on the ideas presented or refuting them. That's what's happening here and is indicative of a healthy scientific process. The paper details that the geometry of a flying solid object at hypersonic speeds can be modified to present as little of a cross-section as possible in the direction in which it's moving. This would have the effect of lessening the meteor effect described by Loeb and Kirkpatrick. Here again, this is interesting because if UFOs correlate with these geometries, then it would be interesting in the same way that an SR-71 was designed to fly at high speed, which defined its distinctive shape. If you see shapes like this, you are looking at a designed object. Interestingly, these low-profile shapes are also ideal for high-speed travel through the interstellar medium, presenting as low of a profile as possible to the dust and gas in the interstellar medium. The authors envision a spacecraft only a few nanometers thick in cross-section, perhaps wrapped around into the shape of a hollow tube, which could then be used essentially as a Bussard ramjet collector in deep space, harvesting hydrogen atoms in the interstellar medium, but then could move at very high speed through a gaseous atmosphere like Earth due to a low cross-section, and be able to minimize drag, heating, and sonic booms. One interesting aspect of this, however, is that it may answer a question that's been open ever since the hearings. The UAP reports to Congress prompted more Freedom of Information requests into U.S. government documents pertaining to UFOs. In one instance, however, the government declined to declassify information on the shapes of the UFOs the Pentagon reports to have seen. This led investigators to wonder why. Why would the shape of an unknown object matter? It might be that the Pentagon is recognizing the shapes of some UFOs as being close to their own hypersonic black projects, or valid areas to research in hypersonic flight, and thus might not want that information out there, especially if they represent the potential leapfrogging by another nation-state, or even the technology of an alien civilization here with unknown intent. Interesting indeed. But the question is, will these probes into the UFO phenomenon or phenomena ever find anything? Will we finally solve the mystery, no matter the origin? Will it be stranger than aliens? And here's where we really get into interesting territory. Yes, they very well might find something. Diehard UFO researchers in the audience might find this citation surprising coming from me, and sorely long overdue for proper recognition due to the stigma. but I think it's very relevant, and here it goes. In a 1969 presentation and paper by University of Arizona atmospheric scientist Dr. James E. McDonald, entitled Science and Default, he determines, in his view, that the investigations of UFOs culminating in the Condon Report were insufficient, and that there really was a phenomenon behind this worthy of study. He goes on to detail 4 UFO cases that have radar data and multiple witnesses that he personally interviewed. Here is a summary of the cases. The first is known as the RB-47 case of 1957. That's an aircraft, and the flight crew of 6 in this case observed a bright white or sometimes red light over the course of over an hour and over a distance of 600 miles, implying that it was following them as they flew through Louisiana and Texas and into Oklahoma. Whatever it was also detected by ground radar and also the electronic countermeasures equipment of the aircraft. It remains unknown to this day what it was, but it was registered on multiple instruments and seen by multiple witnesses, and that makes it interesting. The second happened in the UK at RAF-USAF installations at Lakenheath and Bentwaters in 1956. This case involved again ground radar, airborne radar, and ground and visual sightings of an object moving at high speed and maneuvering unconventionally. These cases exhibit an interesting possibility, which was noted by Dr. Donald Menzel of Harvard many years ago, a skeptic of the highest order, that while they may have mundane explanations, such as atmospheric plasmas and things like ball lightning, it's also possible that there's something about natural phenomena that happen in our atmosphere very rarely that we don't know anything about. Well, that in itself is worthy of study. The third case happened in Japan near Haneda Air Force Base, where a bright bluish-white light was seen in 1952, visually at first, and then on radar, which resulted in the scrambling of an interceptor aircraft. This one gets muddy in that it's not clear if the visual sighting correlates with the radar return. Regardless, the object, or apparent object, was pursued for 90 seconds before it accelerated away from the aircraft at high speed. Interestingly in this case, however, is that the radar tracked both the aircraft and the object during the encounter. The fourth happened at Kirtland Air Force Base in 1957, where an apparent egg-shaped object essentially flew over the runway, hovered for 10 seconds, and then shot upwards, and was tracked by radar for a time, only to then return and trail an aircraft that was taking off at the base. Make of these cases what you will, but they do seem to say that there is something here to study, and there always has been. What we need now is science and good data, and the process of getting that has begun. Thanks for listening. I am futurist and science fiction author John Michael Godier, and be sure to check out my books at your favorite online book retailer and subscribe to my channels for regular in-depth explorations into the interesting, weird, and unknown aspects of this amazing universe in which we live.